Good morning, folks. Happy Saturday. Thanks for coming to my lecture. So there's various problems in thought, and one of those problems is we're going to call it cognitive entropy. Because of the restrictive circumstances of time and space, the thinking agent's cognitive processing is nearly always, if not always, incremental. Through this intersection of the graph of moment and place, the seed of entropy falls into the cognitive world and infects its resiliency. Along with a host of other reasons, we are vulnerable to self-deception precisely because our thinking process is bounded up by time and space, held, as it were, in the crux of here and now. The mind holds one thought and then another. It's very simple, really. We're vulnerable to deception because we don't know everything and because we know things a piece at a time. This is one of the most basic reasons why ideology can become idolatry. It is one of the reasons why there is a tendency for any certain theory, thought, belief, approach, or sentence held too long or too hard to overly describe everything that it is being related to. We do this everywhere and all the time to great effect. We tremendously and necessarily simplify things by relating them to some other thing that we think we know and can get a handle on, that we think we know and have a handle on. We could almost say that this is the mechanism of cognition itself. Over-defining, over-describing the world is how we take control over it. Bringing chaos and subservience to an idea is how we navigate it and turn it into cosmos. But it can also be our downfall. You readily and often become overconvinced by your own thought patterns, and you don't realize it. To a great extent, this is efficiency. It allows you to operate freely in the world without unnecessary complexities and restraints. But it also makes you prey to deception, whether self-deception or the deception of predatory, totalizing ideologies. An example of these, like materialism, is predatory precisely because it is fragmented or partial, having access only to part of reality. I want you to think of a fragmented framework, like materialism, in two ways, both as a map and as a beast. As a map, it accounts for some aspects of reality, and you can rely on it to navigate some of the landscape of the world. But because it is fragmented, there are places that are hidden to the map. There will be geographical features which you cannot see or account for. Not seeing a mountain or a river, you may pass through it with no experiential differentiation of the terrain. As well as things that are there and you do not see, there may be places the map projects or thinks it sees that are not there. You may fall off the edge of the world where the map projects only solid ground. The edge of the world, the edge of the map, is a hole concealing all that we do not know. The beast, adequate to account for some aspects of reality, arms its inadequacy to the teeth to account for, ward off, and deny the places that it does not know. Afraid of where it knows itself to be inadequate, a fragmented framework like a devouring beast tries to close the hole of its teeth around everything that it cannot articulate. In some relational and discursive contexts, those jaws have been incredibly strengthened. Those teeth have been incredibly well defined, and they are incredibly able to close that structure around your vision of the world. The perimeter of a map, the size and shape of what it does not know, the perimeter of a map forms the size and shape of what it does not know, creating the edges of the framework, opening into chaos, the mouth of hell. The whole perimeter of the map, as much as it knows, limits and allows the size of its jaws. If your framework accounts for more reality, more territory than a competing framework, its jaws will not be able to close around yours. So part of my premise for this lecture is something that you've all felt. That if Christianity is the truth, then it has access to more meaning, more revelation, more insight, more rationality in every area of human thought, not just in Sunday school. So as outlined in my talk description, let's discuss a few maybe relevant major realms of human thought. Starting with mythology. Vast tracts of human history and thought have been dominated by storytelling. Opening our mind from the tyranny of the moment can look like taking the time to pay attention to those ancient stories. We should not think that stories that have been refined, accumulated, and remembered across thousands of years have the same weight or exigency as the half-hearted stories we moderns tell on the back porch or late at night in the kitchen, if indeed we tell stories to each other at all. An understanding of those stories and what they have true to say about human psychology, experience, and cognition is vastly helpful in correcting worldviews overly influenced by scientism and materialism. These stories do not tend to have much that is quantitatively true to say about human experience, but much that is qualitatively true. For example, there is a story in the Midrash about how at the end of time, the Midrash is a book of Jewish mystical writings, how at the end of time, there will be a battle between Leviathan and a consecrated bull. The Leviathan flings up or sacrifices the consecrated bull with its fins, and the bull flings up or sacrifices the Leviathan with its horns. As led by its horns, the bull is the thing that penetrates or tears apart. Leviathan is associated with at least two things. First of all, with unconquerable primordial chaos still present within creation itself. And secondly, of convergence or a closing or separation into new realities. Rebecca uses this word, uses the same root when she names her third son with Jacob, saying, I will call his name Levi, for now Jacob will be joined to me. Jacob will be Levied to me. A bringing together of a closing of separation into new realities. With their slaughtering of each other, the bull and the Leviathan bring the conclusion of history. They've annihilated each other. History's over. The Messiah will then accept their carcasses as a fitting sacrifice and prepare out of them a wedding feast for the children of God. This story has nothing at all with which to start a conversation in scientific terms, but it can start a conversation in nearly any other aspect of human concern or human interest. For a good understanding of what mythology is and its services to humanity and its limits, read Chesterton, especially Chesterton in Everlasting Man, where he defines mythology as an imaginative search for something the soul feels must be true. As a search for what must be true, mythology, like all language, is not that true thing itself. But the best mythologies, which tend to get remembered, in the best mythologies, we might still see great and small patterns in the steps that sincere men of all ages have taken in their hunt for what the true thing must be. To be larger in every way than liberal humanism, your Christianity needs to have within it a coherent integration of paganism. If Christianity correctly understands the nature of reality, then it is positioned correctly to understand the implications of mythology, no matter what those implications might be. The church teaching on mythology should be, and certainly could be, the most compelling interpretation of mythology available. What explanatory power could relativism, scientism, or rationalism bring to that Midrash story, or any other ancient story in comparison to the doctrines written down from N.T. Wright to John the Revelator and all the ages of fellowship in between? The conversation of the church is far better equipped to understand and interpret that story from the Midrash than any other worldview or dialogue or rational perspective that you could take. Transitioning to politics. Our current public discourse is dominated by critical theories and their antagonists. Those critical theories tend to be more easily identifiable than their antagonists, and so for now, they do and will dominate the popular conversation, which is one way to understand the definition of politics. Now, we should rarely see critical theories as bad in themselves, but understand that one of their common factors is the scrutinization of injustice, which is basically a good motivation. But any motivation goes horribly awry when it loses contact with the rest of the virtues. Critical theory, taken as a body of literature spanning about 6 or 7 decades, offers an enormous and beneficial critique of power used wrongly. What it does not offer nearly so well as Christianity is a celebration of the power that is given up, or even of power that is used rightly. There are many other things that critical theory is not prepared to offer. But if Christianity offers access to total truth, then the truth that is spoken by critical theory should not make Christianity ashamed. To put it bluntly, for your Christianity to have moral superiority to critical theory, your Christianity must have within it a seriously crippling critique of power. This involves at least 2 things: a distance from power and a knowledge of something that is more valuable, higher, more desirable than power. Along with the popular political order, critical theory also dominates the popular normative order, which is a much broader thing than the political order. The normative order consists both of what people are telling each other they should do and of what people are telling themselves they should do. The normative order is what people really believe that they should be doing. The normative order is what genuinely connects us to some good or truth, so that in relation to that good or truth, we can become better. If you describe a thing which you know to be true through the ways which would be better if you acted out that truth, you've established a relatively fixed point towards which you can act out the ethical process. Critical theories, though, do not offer enough understanding of goal or process. The steps out are not justifiably enough defined to be actionable beyond the retributive. This does not mean that retribution for injustice should not happen. It just means that the ethical vision ends with retribution and goes no further. But even in regards to this necessary and just retribution, and I should say with a general sense there, even in regards to retribution, Christianity should be prepared to offer more than critical theory, not less. Christians should be able to see more clearly how retribution is necessary, and that it can be abundant, creative, imaginative, jubilaic. All characteristics we have tremendous precedent for in the social teachings of Christ, the Catholic Church, and Moses. Two good things to read here if you're interested in this conversation about keeping the virtues together rather than separating out any one would probably be After Virtue by Alistair McIntyre and After God by Mark Taylor. Very good texts. Let's go on to science. The nomological order, or the order of definition, of quantitative definition, the order of identity, the nomological order, or that on which you can depend as certain, has been dominated within the last few centuries by the scientific. Science should rightly be taken as a methodology or a certain approach to the set of facts that we have on hand. A certain approach to the set of facts and phenomena that can be derived should be approach this set of facts, not a worldview or ontology capable of saying what is and what isn't. A very useful and surprisingly technically accurate way of saying this is that science describes not what is true, but what works. It breaks things down into their sub-components and lays out the process to rearranging those components to achieve a desired end. Science does not tell you what is, but explains to you how to manipulate what is into alternative forms. This is science rightly considered, and using this approach, using this conceptual framework, has produced the tremendously altered landscape of modern industrialism. With this much concrete effect, there's clearly something right about this way of seeing the world. But given its destruction, its abuses, and its negligence to the world, there's clearly something wrong about the way it sees the world too. Something that it is unable to see, something that it is missing. In terms of worldviews, though, rather than actual technical application, science has often become empiricism or radical materialism, where it tries to take on or offer up total descriptions of reality. As such, a partial description, which would totalize itself, it becomes a fragmented predatory framework, a devouring beast, a false god. Science's rational domination of the nomological realm was much more secure 100 years ago than it is today. But it is still in places, nevertheless, strong. Quantum mechanics, special relativity, and the uncertainty principle have all mathematically debilitated empiricism as a total description of reality on its own turf, in its own terms. The totalizing tendency, though, can still remain. One nature of the structure of the universe as it turns out to be, radically uncertain, radically emergent, is one nature of the structure of the universe that reveals itself as such is mercy. There is much to be studied here and much better minds than mine that can describe it for you. Simone Weil's luminous text on science, necessity, and the love of God is one that I'll always recommend for a description of how faith takes up and mends meaning in the very places where mathematics and materialism break it down. Though the mathematical side of the empiricist debate was decided long ago, math really is not that fluent in articulating itself on topics of meaning, and so empiricism has functionally remained in times and places as a popular nomological order. The scientific's particular strength is the credibility it gives to the physical world. Science's particular strength is the credibility it gives to the physical world. The best of science really does come close to addressing an apple on its own terms and no other. In this sense, it takes everything in good faith. Like ministering servants before the dais of their discipline, the ministers of science attend to the sovereignty of what is with incredible detail, incredible obedience, and incredible veracity. The Christian framework should attend to the revelation of nature, the givenness of what is, with no less authenticity, with no less rigor, with no less attention to detail. If the physical givenness of what is comes to us from God, then its every detail is already relatable and related to him. The poorest species of static coral restricted to the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, endowed with nothing else in its own structure, should not be insulted by the chemicals of our industrial waste. For when we assault it as such, we insult its creator. Christianity should be able to make as much or more use of physical givenness as does science. If it is less able to interpret and understand the body than science, and I don't just mean quantitatively, I don't mean cells and molecular structure. If it is less able to interpret and understand the body than science, then in that area occupies and supposes less of the truth. For this reason, theory should always be grounded in and take as sacred the body. Our philosophy should be in conversation with, in tidal pole with, the body. Theology and the body should attend to and mutually form and inform each other, not ignore each other. Here's some things that Christianity can offer science. Your Christianity needs to have within it the spiritual energy that can take the material at its own value, and beyond that inherent value, bless the material with value that is beyond it. Your Christianity should be able to sacralize what is. In other words, it should be able to see and articulate how the physical shape and structural limitations of the world are gift, are grace. Your Christianity should be big enough to swallow up science whole, spitting out nothing, and subsume its entire map into a larger and fuller conception of what's real. Two books here. Science, On Science Necessity and the Love of God. Simone Weil, go buy it. If they don't publish it, somebody please publish it. And The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhns. He shows how science moves from paradigm to paradigm, leaving much behind, and it's not maybe as consistent or dependable as sometimes made out to be, even though we're given its incredible concrete effects in our everyday lives. So maybe a thesis here is to make the most of all the meaning possible all of the time. Anytime a society fails to make use of all the meaning that is available, it seconds a little bit. If you know a part of reality and choose to ignore and devalue it, you won't just be blinded to what you choose not to see, but also your willful ignorance will start to poison the rest of your reality that you do value and do attend to. We see the results of this clearly in clinical psychology. If you do not or are unable to assimilate some aspect of the reality that you are subject to, your psyche becomes crippled. We see this also in terms of self-transcendence, in devotion, and in obedience. Anytime an individual does not incorporate all the truth that they have available, they stymie their growth and potential and jeopardize the virtue that they've acquired already. The ambitions and ideals of a person, of a body, of a society, of a church are successful in proportion to that body's willingness to integrate all of the truth that it has been given. This is one of the reasons why fundamentalism does not work, why it tends to sicken, cripple, and wound the human spirit. Fundamentalism does not adequately describe what reality is like. Process, narrative, perception, co-creation, collaboration, and spirit are things which it is not adequately prepared to describe. I mean by fundamentalism a religious system which accepts as its criteria for truth a standard historically developed by materialism, which idolizes objective certainty as the only valid way of knowing and the only valid basis for acting in the world. There's a lot more to say there. I don't know if I can say it. Sure. I mean by fundamentalism a religious system which accepts as its criteria for truth a standard historically developed by materialism, which idolizes objective certainty as the only valid way of knowing, the only valid basis for acting in the world. I'm suggesting that there are valid ways of knowing, there are valid bases for acting in the world that are other than objective certainty, like faith or something. Fundamentalism is a fragmented, predatory, totalizing framework. It is capable of eating you and either crippling you with its jaws if you stay within it, or damaging you with its teeth if it spits you back up. Fundamentalism is a partial map. You can very readily fall off its edge. There are many holes in it where you can fall through and become prey to many other fragmented, predatory, totalizing frameworks. It's very easy to fall off fundamentalism into materialism. It really is. It's very easy to fall off the edge of fundamentalism into relativism. It's not hard. Partial frameworks that claim totality are beasts, and incomplete maps are full of monsters. Fundamentalism could perhaps learn things from other partial frameworks. It could perhaps draw tremendously from disciplines such as narrative theory, symbology, or cognitive science, if it were willing to sit down at their feet and listen. But the wonderful thing is that it doesn't even need to. All of the missing geography within fundamentalism is already within mysticism. Historic Christianity contains within it all the necessary medicine for fundamentalism. The prophets, the church fathers, the mystics are more than qualified as a team of physicians for fundamentalism if the patient will let itself be ministered to. If you or someone you love is suffering from fundamentalism, try contending seriously with Christian thinkers who were writing before the European Enlightenment. A look at how St. Basil, St. Athanasius, St. Gregory of Nyssa, or St. John of the Cross interprets Scripture, teaches godliness, understands grace, will be of great help, both in content and in methodology, to Daniel Kaufman or Ken Ham, or Jerry Falwell Jr., Sr. Read old books. Pre-Enlightenment Christianity can, I think, preserve or, pour new wine into, I don't know, the metaphor's failing me. Pour new wine into fundamentalism. It'll burst and become a broader thing. So maybe this is a vignette, I guess. Your prayers, your positive attention and intention in the world are effective in proportion to your surrender to the good as you know it to be. The ambitions and ideals of a society are successful in proportion to that society's willingness to integrate all of the truth that it has been given. With coherent complexity comes knowledge, and with knowledge, responsibility. Therefore, it is not only to withstand fragmented and competing frameworks that you need to develop a coherent interpretive structure out of the insane complexity of the world, but also so that you can act wholly. The tendency for one thought, one system or pattern of belief, or any other category of logos that you want to give to become totalizing, should never be thought of as plaguing just one aspect of meaning making. The tendency for any thought or system or belief or sentence to totalize what it relates to and overly define should not only be seen as plaguing one, say, the largest frame of reference. Instead, it is also the tendency in our perception that allows us to see patterns, to differentiate those patterns, and to individuate between them. It affects this tendency, affects and allows the process by which you identify the world. The tendency with which you identify the world is also the tendency to overly identify what you don't know yet by what you do know. This tendency, which I've been calling cognitive entropy, is the structure of physicality itself, duplicated in every level of individual and collective thought and action. The tendency is recursive, acting upon itself, acting upon the ways in which it acts upon itself, and constant. This tendency is not something that is going away. It's not something you want to go away. But it is something which can be seen as going towards something. If there is some counteraction to our over-definitions, if there is some counter-definition to our definitions, some prior definition vitalizing, renewing, and sacralizing them from within, then we can revel in nominalism. If everything is bathed in grace, we do not need to create for ourselves. We can revel in nominalism if everything is bathed in a grace, bathed in a meaning we do not create ourselves. We need an absolute value outside of our choice and real options within our realm of influence that we can elect between in some relation to that absolute value. Any thought can and will become totalizing if there is no other totalizing thought for it to become subject under. For example, mechanistic observation and implementation is ultimately descriptive of reality. Could become my totalizing thought if I had no other totalizing thought for it to become subservient under. Or I don't know enough to achieve any sort of good, and so I may as well take what I can get. It would be a serviceable totalizing thought that I could order the rest of my experience in reality under if there was no other totalizing thought for that thought to become subject under. So there's this balance between the ability to identify, to explain what you don't yet know in terms of what you do know, which is of course an inadequate way to explain what you do not know. This is say one of the fundamental cognitive movements that allows processing, that allows thought, and it can become underactive or overactive. We've been describing ways in which it becomes overactive in totalizing predatory frameworks which try to completely explain what is without the actual ability to do so. And so we're going to transition to talking about some ways to combat the overly active tendency to define, the overly active fixing or fixating or definitional, which we've been calling cognitive entropy. One of the ways to resolve cognitive entropy, deception or over-identification, and this is one of the ways, is to accept that there must be one thought under which all other thoughts will organize themselves, and select for that totalizing thought a thought which does not simplify or reduce the identity of anything in relation to it. What kinds of statements could explain everything without overly identifying or reducing anything? A popular option is the statement, everything is relative. This sentence is a very good one because it escapes being false. It escapes overly simplifying anything that it is not. It is always already applicable to every other thing. And in this way, even its content is a description of the necessary criterion for a totalizing thought. Everything is relative is almost the meta-definitive definition because it identifies itself by identifying the way in which it identifies everything else before it identifies any other thing. I became curious about this statement. By what process, though, did the statement everything is relative, which in its grammatical content only says that everything is related, by what process does this statement come to mean everything is meaningless, when it could just as easily have come to mean that everything is full of meaning? Split into two contradictory interpretations, everything is relative loses its capacity to fulfill the one-to-totalizing thought. Another condition for the optimal totalizing thought is the ability to optimize the relationships between everything else. I think we're moving too quickly here. Let me ask you guys this. How do you think the statement everything is relative came to mean everything is meaningless rather than everything is brimming full of meaning? I don't know.
Could it actually mean, like if you take it to say everything is related, you're saying you think that could stand as a totalizing truth?
Yeah.
But
maybe not the best one, but anything could stand as a totalizing sentence.
Right, but in other words, are we trying to judge whether that's a good one or not?
Yeah. We're looking at its redeemable qualities. We're looking at the ways in which it performs adequacy as a totalizing thought.
Well, I was looking for critique.
Good.
Is there something about saying everything is relative? It's kind of like saying nothing has context. There's no, like, anything can become cut loose from any ability to interpret it. And so then it just becomes meaningless because it separates.
That's good.
Or if it's saying almost the opposite, everything is context, everything must be contextualized. Everything is related means everything has to be in a context of some sort. So in other words, you can't separate it. You could take it that way too, though, right? You can't take things apart utterly because everything is related to everything else. And so that could be like everything is meaningful. Is that how you're seeing it?
I'm not trying to see it in one way. So Tasha's saying something like, if everything is context and there's no definition.
I think it's a bad one if everything is relative. Everything is only relative. If things don't have thingness of themselves.
If everything is only related.
Yeah,
If there's only relation rather than.
Well, only relation, then it's all one word.
Cool.
But can relative be taken to mean related? Like in society's context today, that is
Yeah.
not what they
Yeah.
mean.
Mm-hmm.
But can it mean that?
But even if it can, what Teddy's is saying, is it still enough? Because if you're technically, if there's no things to be related, then there can't be relation. You have to have the relata.
My suspicion is that the grammatical content doesn't point us one way or the other, but there has to be a prior disposition of doubt or of sadness or of just in unwillingness or inability to see or identify meaning, which accepts the formulation everything is relative as a formulation of meaninglessness. I think there has to be a prior attitude or disposition which comes in to define the statement. That's my suspicion.
I agree with that.
Josh. Desire and imagination come from the heart.
Like, as those prior conditions, what do you imagine when you hear that sentence? So you hear that, and then I feel like where you go with that is dependent on what you're desiring and also what you're capable of imagining.
Thank you.
And the other thing is, with that, okay, so we were created for God. We were created to be. Like, if we don't have God in our life, we are not all there. And so if we take God out of the equation, which sinful society does, all the theories in the world, we're not even with it. We can't come to any sort of coherence. So we bring God in as an absolute, and I don't know, are you saying somehow the word relative? Yeah, God is related to everything. So then in that case, he couldn't be. But if God is an absolute and is in this, then everything makes sense. But everything has to rely on God.
Let's go there.
And it's not a symmetrical relation. So in other words, it's not like God needs the universe to be God, the way the universe needs God to be the universe.
Yes.
And so in that sense, that everything is related is inadequate to describe that very essential kind of priority of an absolute creator.
Thank you all. Let's go back over just a little bit of ground in order to keep going. So are you seeing the way in which we're looking for a totalizing statement which allows everything else to be itself and does not overly or totally identify it? This is one of the strengths of this formulation, everything is related. But another condition for the optimal totalizing thought will be its ability to optimize the relations between everything else. Everything is related is true, but it does not connotate any change if you don't like the way that things happen to currently be related. Before we go on, I want to give you another example of the definitional nature of thought and its consequences, wherein what you believe comes to define or create reality, comes to sentence reality into existence. When you say and believe everything is meaningfully related, you act like it. And a world is created. When you say or believe that everything is meaninglessly related, you act like it and debilitate the meaning around you. The sentence dictates an outcome within reality. This is the power and the importance of belief. That it has embodied outcomes in the world. The things we believe can enable or debilitate us and our actions in the world. And so, you need to somehow find a totalizing thought that, when touching every other thing, identifies it in a way which most allows its nature to become positively and beneficially related to the natures of other things. A totalizing thought which so forms or identifies the natures of every other thing to be in mutual harmony and beneficence towards each other is the only totalizing thought that frees rather than constricts the nature of everything in its definition. You need a totalizing thought that adds inherent meaning or direction to the cosmos, so that your direction within the cosmos can have relative meaning in relation to it. You need a totalizing thought that both sides of the incontrovertible paradoxes, that both sides of incontrovertible paradoxes can come into peaceful collaboration in relationship to. You need a totalizing thought that gives you the confidence to act. You need a totalizing thought that gives you the hope to act daringly, to risk your energy, your time, yourself upon the world. This solution to the cognitive entropy says, for your own sanity, for your own good, you need some one thing by which the saliency of every other thing springs into life for you, or falls away dead to you. One definition, against whose awful simplicity all other things are defined. And so the solution to cognitive entropy, the necessary one thing that we would have already had we gotten it nowhere else in the world and never left Sunday school, is the information God is love. If you don't accept the need for a totalizing thought, however, this particular process by which we arrive at this particularly satisfying conclusion may not satisfy you. In that case, there are still other places where we can look for solutions to cognitive entropy or over-definition. One of the best places we can look for this solution is other people. You can escape the overly corrective patterns of your own thought, the tendency to over-define what you don't know by what you know already. You can escape cognitive entropy in dialogue, through dialogue. Two things that resist cognitive entropy or over-definition within dialogue are process and duopositionality. When you're speaking with someone else, with everything that you have to offer, so that you are taken up into the conversation and the range of your perception is expanded and limited to the frame of the conversation, something very important happens. Your cognitive process and theirs can coalesce to the point where you share in their experience. In a really good conversation, the horizon of significance shrinks around you. And the distance between you and your conversational partner becomes cosmos. In a really good conversation, your mind can and does touch the mind of the other. And in this way, you with your knowledge and your personality come within the experience of the other and inhabit it with them. Real dialogue, to its fullest extent, happens when you are speaking with the other and yourself within the other. This is what we call empathy. Feeling with or feeling alongside another. When this communion goes both ways, and I'm hearing both you and you as if you were myself, and you are hearing me both, and you are hearing both me and me as if I were yourself, we begin to make vital and accessible, rich, all the space between us. The spirit that animates a real conversation revivifies, makes alive again, breathes life and breath into the very things that isolate us, the mechanistic quanta between us and every other. So in a way, this is really simple, and you've all known it. In a way, it's really hard to think about and hard to articulate. But it looks something like, if I'm talking to Titus and I can talk to Titus in two ways. I can talk to Titus and only hear something which is not me, something which I'm not relating to, something which I'm not experiencing. Or I can, if Titus knows me and loves me, and I know and love Titus, he can open up his experience to me and I can enter into it and I can relate to the things he's saying as if they were happening to me and judge their value as if they were happening to me. And he can do the same for me. And then he's not only talking to Obi, he's talking to Titus in Obi. I'm not only talking to Titus, I'm talking to Obi in Titus. And that opens up and makes accessible and enlivens all the difference, all the space between me and Titus. And there's world, there's meaning, there's cosmos. Not chaos, not separation, not isolation between Titus and I. And Titus's knowledge, Titus's apprehension of the truth become available to me. He offers up or affords within his own knowledge and experience, he affords his own experience to me. He forgives it to me. And I don't have all the language here that I want is not here yet. But yeah, I think you can see the picture. And okay, so we talked about how the limitations of time and space, the very real practical limitations, isolate me into the moment, isolate me into the here and the now, isolate me into this body and this space, and the process of dialogue, and there's other ways in which you can transcend positionality as well, I think, and they look like process. They look like moving towards something. They look like a goal where you extend out your intentions across time in a manner which is completing them. In that sense, you are buying up or redeeming time when your intentions are having effective, meaningful outcome in reality. You are redeeming time. You are making up the loss of passage. So that's process. And also when I'm in this dialogue, when I'm in this conversation, I enter into a process whereby I can be freed from the isolation of the moment and of space. And this is a spiritual matter. This is not, we can talk about it in cognitive sciences terms, which we should do, because then we can dialogue with secularists about spiritual matters. But this is a spiritual phenomenon. This is communion. This is something we know about. So we're going to wrap up with maybe a few other things. Another place. Another place where we could perhaps look for a solution to the problem of cognitive entropy is play. Surely there is a vitalizing power and delight. And this is the approach or the attempted solution of radical relativists from Protagoras to your postmodernist professor. The question is, could the endless play of differences be enough to structure a beautiful, perpetual future of dalliance, of play, of imagination, of delight? It's a question. So we could ask, what are the necessary preconditions for delight, for dalliance, for humor, for deconstruction? What are the necessary preconditions for humor? Some of those are real engagement, confidence, and commonality, attention, charisma, understanding. All of these are necessary preconditions. All of the necessary preconditions of humor are in opposition to difference. Humor requires a delightful and unexpected collapse from a more organized state into a less organized, from a more expected outcome to a less expected, or from a single directional meaning to a double. A pun, for instance, or an unexpected outcome is a sort of double, allowing the mind to occupy for an instant all the territory between one meaning and another. Humor inherently involves a movement from stability into multiplicity. Humor inherently involves a movement from stability into multiplicity. The endless play of differences, then, cannot endlessly provide the groundwork for humor because it will eventually run out or run through the existing stock of commonality, capable of collapsing into incongruity. Dalliance, endlessly variated, must eventually become weariness, without the rhythm of rest. In repetition and stability. Collapses within narrative structure may be vivifying, but there must be an omnipresent reassembling of narrative structure even for that collapse to continue. And in this way, God is always creating the world. This is what is meant by God creating into the open future. In an ever-present, giving, consecrating, sustaining, enabling way, reassembling all that falls into the past into what is falling into the future. All that would fall into the past, what instead falls into the future. This is what is meant by God creating into the open future. This ever-present, never escapable collapse of meaning, identity structure identified by the postmodernists, by the deconstructionists, and celebrated and enjoyed and deeply revealed by the deconstructionists, is a manifestation of the law of at least two things. Since for there to be a perennial disintegration of meaning in language or in thought, there must be a perennial sustaining or reintegration of meaning in language or in thought. And so we meet the necessity for an asymmetrical relationship. We meet the necessity for at least two things. And perhaps we meet that necessity at every level of cognition, at every level of meaning. From the neurological physiology to the belief in the worldview. We need both dogma and mysticism, thesis and antithesis, order and chaos, 0 and 1, sleep and wakefulness, the Apollonian and the Dionysian, the matter and the spirit, the perception and the structure, the creator and the creation. These are some of the ways of talking about the way in which we need the natures of two different things to adhere, to cohere, to collaborate, to co-create together. And this, I think, provides the necessary characteristics for the framework, the coherent interpretive framework, capable of sustaining itself across time and space, and in competition, or even given competition with other fragmented, predatory totalizing frameworks. Two necessary characterizations of this resilient framework, I think, are stability and plasticity. There needs to be rigidity and a plasticity where your framework is capable of both repelling and congealing around what it does not yet understand. And I think organic materials exemplify these characteristics. I don't think steel exemplifies this as good as does skin. So maybe my goal here is to avoid being either, as J.V. Cunningham said, this humanist whom no beliefs constrained grew so broad-minded he was scatterbrained, or, as I reformulated in reply, this fundamentalist so frame-constrained that every step becomes a sprain. I guess that's all I have. I've been, tried to write the conclusion this morning, but I wrote it here with you all now. So here we are. If you have any questions, maybe somebody can respond to them.
You mentioned the 3 And for the end, I feel like you're going for some kind of Neoplatonic descent of the moment back into unity, and then eventually beyond language, which is kind of the apophatic, conversation, apophatic. But what in particular are you seeing as the solution there? Like in what were they seeing that we need to hear?
I think we've stopped seeing some things that humans have seen for millennia. I think as moderns, we've stopped seeing some of the ways in which we can see, or stopped maybe, yeah. I think we're in danger of seeing less than the ancients saw. So ways of seeing, I think, methodologies of seeing, understanding, like embodied understandings of collaboration, of working together. I think, structures the ways we think in important ways. Symbology is probably the most crucial for me here right now. And so again, there's this sort of conversation between two separate things that I think begins to be allowed once you accept symbology. The symbological interpretation and reading does not discount or devalue the literal. It complements the literal. And so what you want is the literal interpretation and the symbolical interpretation and all of the space between. You want them turned to each other as lovers, as collaborators. And here is where, especially the Eastern Church and the early church, can be really valuable to us who are reading after the Enlightenment and reading after modernism and reading after rationalism and reading after deconstruction. They read in ways that you don't expect, but are incredibly rewarding. The way that St. Basil interprets the Bible, like I haven't read anything like it. I didn't come up with that in Sunday school, but it's rich and it's complementing. It doesn't destroy anything that I already had. It adds.
I'm not sure if I'm totally with you, but if I follow your thought, okay, so we would say democracy as a form of government is a good thing, but we are also currently seeing it degenerate into anarchy, where the ancients would have seen monarchy as the answer. We see democracy, and I'm not trying to get politics, but comparing modern thought with ancient thought. We would say it's good, but it has lost maybe some of. I think it's King Solomon. He was a monarch. He accomplished a lot that you don't accomplish in a democracy. So, and law and order are a given in a democracy, in a monarchy. Not necessarily from the king himself, but from his subjects. Where in a democracy, they are as good as the courses of the courses, but it is subject to, like he said, some of the things that they saw we no longer see. I don't know. Does that get close to what is that a fair example of what you're trying to say?
It's a very specific example. Yes, thank you. So maybe there's this way in which metaphor is a valid way of knowing the world, and it's a valid way of knowing the world because of the very real or incredible freedom or elasticity or potentiality which our Creator invested into reality. And so the plasticity, the malleability of the subjective framework is good and is given and is necessary to the appreciation of the objective framework. And the two have to cohere somehow. And it looks, I don't know what it all looks like yet, but I think freedom comes in here really strong, Conrad. And yeah, a lot of things converge here. I've been trying to work with these ideas over the last couple weeks in my blog at Foederati for Now. I take a cognitive science approach there, learning a lot from John Vervaeke and Ian McGilchrist, and trying to bring those insights from cognitive science to theories of meaning making.
The thing you said there close to the end about play just feels really important to me.
Really?
The ability to play with kind of a rigid structure and a flexible one. And I think in real life, one of the things that makes that difficult,
Especially for those of us who are still in Eden.
I agree. One of the things that makes that really difficult or impossible is if you don't have the belief that God is love really, really
Yeah.
fundamentally.
Yeah.
Because you're not safe to
Yeah.
play, because you might be
Yes.
wrong. And you will
Yes.
be wrong.
Yes.
And if God isn't love, then,
Hallelujah.
then getting it wrong is just the end of your world. And you have to be able to risk that
Yes.
in a playful way.
There has to be a grace bearing up
Right.
our objective reality. Thank you all.